The 1950s weren't just jukeboxes and drive-in diners. Behind the curtain, animators were sneaking wild ideas into their work. Ideas so strange, so daring, that censors nearly fainted. These weren't Saturday morning giggles. These were bold experiments that pushed boundaries nobody wanted pushed. What happens when cartoons stop playing safe and start poking nerves? Let's rewind to the Cold War era and uncover the forgotten animations that would never, ever make it to your screen today. Number 20. The Tale of the Fisherman and the Fish, 1950. On the surface, this Soviet cartoon looks harmless. A fisherman catches a golden fish that grants wishes based on a classic fairy tale. But once it hit Western festivals, critics panicked. American outlets claimed it was capitalism in disguise, pointing to the greedy wife who demands more until she loses everything. Meanwhile, Soviet officials weren't thrilled either, accusing the lush, decorative animation style of being too indulgent. Talk about pleasing nobody. The artistry was undeniable. Director Mikhail Chekhanovsky created swirling seascapes that made even Disney's animators jealous. But the Cold War paranoia turned a simple fable into a political minefield. American distributors refused to touch it, European boards banned it, and in the USSR it got shelved for not fitting party standards. Yet bootleg reels quietly circulated, becoming prized treasures in animation schools. When it was finally released decades later, audiences were stunned by how advanced it looked. Critics called it the most beautiful trap ever set for Western audiences. Imagine being a kid expecting a sweet fairy tale and instead walking into a symbolic tug-of-war between two world powers. No wonder this masterpiece ended up locked away for years. Number 19. Hellbent for Election, 1952. Picture this. A cartoon originally made as a cheerful campaign ad for Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940s suddenly hauled back into the spotlight during the Red Scare. By 1952, with McCarthyism at its peak, this animated short became Exhibit A in the case against subversive artists. The film itself was stylish, fast, and jazzy, rejecting Disney's rounded characters for sharp, modernist designs. At first, it was just a quirky political cartoon, but when it was screened again in the early 1950s, watchdogs lost their cool. Animators like Chuck Jones found themselves under suspicion, accused of pushing foreign ideas. Imagine being blacklisted not for a speech or a book, but for a cartoon train barreling toward progress. Theaters that tried to show it were threatened. One Kansas City cinema had its windows smashed just for advertising the film. Even the Museum of Modern Art in New York drew protests for scheduling it. For many, this wasn't just an animation, it was a dangerous visual language. In truth, it wasn't dangerous at all, just bold and different. But in the climate of fear, boldness was enough. The short disappeared for decades until animation students rediscovered it, turning it into a legendary underground influence. It proved one thing. In 1950s America, even a cartoon could land you in hot water. Number 18. The Sailor's Return, 1951. At first glance, this British short looked like a wholesome homecoming story. Sailors arrive back from long voyages, families greet them at the docks, and jazz music plays over watercolor backdrops. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. Authorities across the British Empire lost their composure over what they saw as too progressive undertones. The problem? The crew wasn't all white. The cartoon showed sailors of different backgrounds reuniting with families in various ports. For colonial-era censors, that crossed a line. Australia's board cited inappropriate portrayals of relations, while Singapore went even further, accusing the film of undermining colonial authority. Back in Britain, even local councils banned it. The director, John Hayles, fought back, saying he was just showing the world as it really was. George Orwell himself defended the cartoon in a column, calling the censorship exactly the thought policing I warned about. Imagine a simple animated reunion turning into a full-scale cultural battle. Despite the bans, film clubs and art schools smuggled in copies, holding secret screenings. At the 1952 Edinburgh Film Festival, it even won an award, despite being technically forbidden. Today, it's remembered as a lost gem, a reminder that sometimes the most innocent-seeming animations carried the loudest messages. Number 17, The Man in the Flying Trapeze, 1954. Don't let the cheerful title fool you. This Max Fleischer cartoon stirred up so much trouble that theaters in 12 states refused to show it. Why? Because its trapeze artist wasn't just swinging through the air, he was symbolically dodging authority figures. Judges, politicians, even police were mocked as the character literally soared over them. And yes, one scene had him fly over the White House. Cue the outrage. In an era obsessed with conformity, this was seen as a direct slap in the face to authority. Paramount, under pressure, recalled the prints. FBI agents even visited theater owners who dared to screen it, asking questions about their loyalties. That's how serious things got over a musical cartoon. For animators, though, it became legendary. Students swapped grainy copies like forbidden candy. Critics later called it the most innocent-looking, politically dangerous cartoon ever made. Fleischer himself insisted he just wanted to animate a silly vaudeville song. But in 1950s America, silliness with the wrong symbolism could end your career. And it did. This was Fleischer's last major animation. Number 16. Animal Farm, 1954. George Orwell's classic tale of animals overthrowing their farmer was already loaded with political punch. But when British animators adapted it, things got messy fast. The CIA secretly funded the project, pushing for changes that made the story more anti-communist than Orwell intended. Talk about behind-the-scenes meddling. Audiences expecting a light-hearted farm story got a brutal parable. Scenes of animals turning tyrannical shocked viewers. Parents dragged crying kids out of theaters, not realizing this wasn't Disney. In France, censors demanded cuts. In America, schools banned it for being too disturbing. Even though it leaned anti-communist, it was considered too heavy for classrooms. The ending was rewritten to be more clear, but critics noticed. Some praised the courage of tackling such dark themes in animation, while others claimed it betrayed Orwell's intent. Either way, the controversy cemented it as a landmark. Critics later said it may be the only cartoon scarier than the book it's based on. Decades later, its legacy remains powerful. It proved cartoons could carry political weight, but it also showed the dangers of tampering with art to fit an agenda. Forgotten by many casual viewers, Animal Farm still stands as one of the most fearless and divisive cartoons of the 1950s. Number 15. The Snow Queen, 1957. If you thought Disney owned the fairy tale crown, think again. The Soviets released The Snow Queen in 1957, and it was so dazzling that American theaters practically panicked. Director Lev Atamanov blended Russian folk art with shimmering winter landscapes, creating visuals that looked decades ahead of their time. The story followed Hans Christian Andersen's classic, but unlike Disney's softened tales, this one kept the darker edges intact. The Snow Queen wasn't just a villain. She was an existential force, cold and terrifying, embodying emotional emptiness. Audiences who expected a cheerful fantasy were stunned. Kids wept, parents fumed, and critics raved about the artistry. So why did it vanish from American theaters? Cold War paranoia. Officials claimed it was foreign influence, and labeled it propaganda. Even Senator Joseph McCarthy name-dropped it as an example of cultural infiltration. Meanwhile, in Europe, critics like André Bazin praised it as treating children as intelligent beings. It even won the top prize at the Venice Film Festival. But in America, distributors kept it on a tight leash. Ironically, decades later, Disney's Frozen would borrow heavily from this very film. The same cartoon once accused of subversion ended up inspiring one of Hollywood's biggest animated hits. Proof that sometimes the art everyone fears is the art that lasts. Number 13. The Truth About Mother Goose, 1957. Disney thought it was making a fun, educational short about nursery rhymes. Instead, The Truth About Mother Goose blew up into an international incident. The cartoon traced the origins of familiar rhymes. London Bridge is falling down, tied to Viking raids. Mary Had a Little Lamb, linked to American education reforms, and Little Jack Horner, connected to political corruption. That last one set Britain off. Officials accused Disney of turning their history into a cartoon punchline. In America, parents claimed it ruined childhood innocence. One PTA chapter even labeled it psychological vandalism. Schools banned it, despite the film earning an Oscar nomination. Critics were divided. Some praised it for teaching kids cultural history. Others said it exaggerated and sensationalized. Walt Disney himself was blindsided. He thought he'd made a clever educational tool. Instead, he'd touched a nerve in multiple countries. The British Film Institute refused to screen it for decades, calling it misleading. It wasn't until 2002 that Disney finally slipped it into a DVD release, almost as an afterthought. Today, it's a reminder that even the House of Mouse could stir controversy when cartoons dug into the messy truth. Number 12. The Romance of Transportation in Canada, 1952. Only in the Cold War could a cartoon about trains, boats, and airplanes become controversial. This Canadian short celebrated the country's transportation history with bold, modernist animation. It even won international awards and snagged an Oscar nomination. But when it reached the United States, censors balked. The problem wasn't trains or planes, it was history. The cartoon briefly showed Indigenous peoples alongside French explorers, presenting Canada's story as more complex than America's expansionist myth. That was enough for U.S. distributors to block it from schools, claiming it showed imbalanced colonial history. In plain English, it didn't fit the American narrative. The minimalist style also raised eyebrows. In an era dominated by Disney's lush realism, its UPA-inspired look felt too European. Some critics dismissed it as foreign-looking, which was practically code for suspicious. Back home, Canada embraced it as a milestone. Abroad, bootlegs made their way into art schools, where it inspired a new wave of animators. Years later, when PBS finally aired it uncut, critics marveled at what had been hidden for so long. What should have been a light history lesson instead became another victim of Cold War cultural gatekeeping. Number 11. The Emperor's Nightingale, 1951. This stop-motion adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's tale was mesmerizing and eerie, using intricately carved puppets to tell the story of a mechanical bird replacing a real one in the emperor's court. Director Gigi Trunka was hailed as a genius, but soon governments across the globe found reasons to ban it. In Czechoslovakia, officials worried it glorified aristocracy. In America, it was accused of promoting foreign ideas. In Japan, it reminded censors too much of their own past emperor worship. Imagine that. One puppet film banned for totally opposite reasons depending on the country. The artistry was undeniable. Trunka's puppets moved with haunting realism, creating a dreamlike atmosphere critics compared to live-action cinema. French critic André Bazin even said, Trunca's puppets have more humanity than most human actors, but the more praise it earned abroad, the more suspicion it attracted at home. Animation schools smuggled copies, and directors like Terry Gilliam later cited it as a major influence. Its ability to unsettle multiple governments proved its real power. It didn't fit into any one political box. That's exactly why everyone tried to shut it down. Number 10. Rudy Toot Toot, 1952. Jazz, crime, and courtroom drama in a cartoon? That's exactly what UPA Studios delivered with Rudy Toot Toot, and it rattled censors everywhere. The short retold the folk ballad of Frankie and Johnny, but with bold, angular designs, vibrant colors, and a swinging jazz score. Director John Hubley turned what could have been a traditional tale into a modernist visual explosion. The trouble started with the story's content. Frankie shoots her unfaithful lover, and suddenly the cartoon world was dealing with betrayal and passion in ways animation had never shown. Some boards declared it morally questionable. Others claimed the jazzy nightclub setting encouraged loose values. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Maryland banned it outright. In the South, theater owners balked at the integrated jazz band scenes. Despite the backlash, it earned an Academy Award nomination and quickly became a cult hit among artists. Disney animators reportedly whispered that this 6-minute cartoon scared their bosses more than any feature film. Why? Because it proved animation could be more than silly gags. It could be modern art. Though censored in its time, Rudy Toot Toot influenced decades of design, paving the way for everything from The Pink Panther to The Incredibles. What once looked dangerous now looks revolutionary. Number 9. The Story of a Crime, 1956. Soviet animator Fyodor Kitruk shattered every convention with The Story of a Crime. The plot was deceptively simple. A man, driven mad by noisy neighbors, lashes out. But the style was jagged, expressionist, and unsettling, far from the socialist realism officials wanted. At first, cultural authorities approved it as a warning against bad manners. Then someone realized it also looked like a critique of Soviet housing life. Too many people saw themselves in the tiny apartments and the frustration of urban living. Suddenly, screenings were canceled, and the film was buried. What made it so striking was its psychological depth. Viewers weren't used to seeing animation portray a man's mental unraveling with such honesty. Western critics who caught rare screenings called it a glimpse into the Soviet psyche. Even Roman Polanski reportedly praised it for its raw honesty. Animation students across Eastern Europe traded secret reels, taking inspiration from its daring style. It wasn't until the 1980s that the film resurfaced under Gorbachev's reforms. Today, it's remembered as a turning point, proving that animation could tackle adult emotions just as effectively as live action. Number 8. The Magic Flute, 1955. Mozart's opera turned into a watercolor fantasy. What could go wrong? Swedish director Stig Lasseby thought he had created a beautiful homage with the magic flute. Instead, he sparked outrage across Europe. The film took liberties with the opera's Masonic imagery, blending it with Norse mythology and dreamlike designs. Religious authorities in Spain and Italy banned it for occult undertones. Austria, proud of Mozart, objected to what they saw as a trivialization of their cultural treasure. Meanwhile, in America, Cold War officials blocked it from import entirely, worried that European art would undermine cultural values. Critics were divided. Some called it a bold reimagining, others labeled it sacrilege. The Salzburg Film Festival even yanked it from its lineup at the last minute under political pressure. The controversy only made the film more legendary. Animation students treasured bootleg reels, studying its fluid designs and daring use of color. It became the kind of film everyone argued about, but few actually saw. Today, historians look back on it as a victim of its time, punished not for what it said, but for daring to mix high culture with cartoons. Number 7. The Milky Way, 1955. On paper, this was a simple children's cartoon. A boy and his cat travel through the solar system, meeting quirky creatures along the way. But the Milky Way managed to upset almost everyone. Soviet authorities grumbled that it relied too much on fantasy instead of scientific accuracy. Western European critics, especially in Catholic countries, accused it of presenting a cosmology that clashed with traditional teachings. In America, it was even flagged as possible propaganda, simply because the boys' astronaut-like imagery looked too much like Soviet space training. For kids, though, it was pure delight, cut-out animation with playful designs and whimsical music. It even won awards at youth festivals in Czechoslovakia and East Germany. Yet the bans piled up until the film virtually disappeared. Decades later, when preservationists restored it, critics hailed it as a lost masterpiece. Imagine a cartoon being accused of both heresy and communism, when in reality it was just a whimsical trip through the stars. That's Cold War paranoia in a nutshell. Number 6. The Tender Game, 1958. Can animation capture romance without a single word? John and Faith Hubley believed so, and they proved it with The Tender Game. Set to the improvisational piano of Oscar Peterson, the short used flowing abstract images to tell the story of two people meeting and falling in love. No dialogue, no plot, just emotion. But in the 1950s, that was scandalous. Censors claimed it was too suggestive, even though nothing explicit happened. Networks refused to air it, worried adults might read too much into the swirling colors and lingering silhouettes. One censor even complained the film was confusing to children, provocative to adults. Despite the resistance, it won acclaim at the Venice Film Festival. Jazz musicians defended it fiercely, calling it proof that animation could sync with music to create pure feeling. For the Hubleys, it cemented their reputation as rebels of the medium. The short became an underground hit in art houses and universities, influencing independent animators for decades. Today, it's remembered as a breakthrough, one that dared to say cartoons could be as subtle and graceful as any love story on screen. Number 5. When Magoo Flew, 1954. Who would have guessed that Mr. Magoo, the bumbling, nearsighted character, could spark international drama? In When Magoo Flew, he boards an airplane and mistakes it for a movie theater. Cue a series of absurd gags where he wanders around in total oblivion. Funny, right? Not to officials in the 1950s. The Civil Aeronautics Board claimed it undermined public confidence in air safety, pointing to scenes where Magoo fiddled with exits or stumbled through security. Abroad, it caused even more uproar. Spain banned it outright after Francisco Franco reportedly saw a character resembling him. In Latin America, censors objected to its portrayal of authority figures as bumbling. Even Britain demanded edits, worried it would encourage passengers to misbehave on planes. Despite all this, the short won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. That didn't stop the State Department from formally asking UPA studios to consider national security implications in future cartoons. Imagine that. Washington warning animators over a comedy about a man who can't see straight. Today, it's remembered not just as a funny Magoo short, but as a perfect example of Cold War anxiety bleeding into every corner of pop culture. Number 4. The Unicorn in the Garden, 1953. Based on James Thurber's fable, this short was anything but kid-friendly. The story. A man sees a unicorn in his garden. His wife mocks him and calls the authorities, but when they arrive, the husband denies it. The twist? They cart the wife off instead. UPA animated it with Thurber's signature minimalist style, all sharp lines and unsettling humor. but 1950s. America wasn't ready. The National Legion of Decency called it morally objectionable, citing its depiction of a dysfunctional marriage and casual treatment of mental health institutions. Schools refused to show it, claiming it could damage children's sense of trust. For animation fans, though, it was groundbreaking. Chuck Jones later said it terrified the industry because it suggested cartoons could bite back against conformity. Bootleg reels circulated among students, and critics praised its sophistication. Looking back, it's easy to see why it spooked censors. It wasn't just about a unicorn. It was about seeing the world differently, and the danger of being punished for it. A short cartoon became a cautionary tale that still feels sharp today. Number 3. The Mascot, 1950. Originally made in the 1930s by Ladislas Starevich, The Mascot returned to circulation in the 1950s, just in time to terrify a new generation. Using stop-motion puppets, including taxidermy animals, it told the story of a toy dog wandering through a surreal city of living garbage and grotesque creatures. Audiences were not prepared. British boards banned it as unnecessarily disturbing. Italy restricted it to adults-only festival screenings. Germany cut 4 minutes of its most surreal sequences. Even in France, critics were split. Some hailed it as genius, others thought it was too psychologically intense for public viewings. Distributors in America shelved it after test audiences complained. Children had nightmares, adults were unsettled, and theaters didn't know what to do with it. Yet directors like Tim Burton and Terry Gilliam later cited it as a major influence. For its time, The Mascot was simply too much. What was meant to be a fantastical puppet adventure instead revealed how disturbing animation could be when it leaned into nightmare imagery. No surprise it was hidden for decades, only to be rediscovered as a masterpiece of surrealism. Number 2. The Telltale Heart, 1953. How do you turn Edgar Allan Poe into a cartoon? With shadows, jagged lines, and haunting narration, that's how. UPA's The Telltale Heart was one of the first animated films given an X certificate in Britain, not because of violence, but because it was considered too frightening for children. The short follows Poe's classic tale of guilt and madness, told with eerie abstraction and narrated by James Mason. For adults, it was mesmerizing. For censors, it was unacceptable. Schools and theaters rejected it as too disturbing. Parents who mistakenly took children to see it walked out shocked. Yet artists adored it. Critics praised its boldness, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. In hindsight, it marked a turning point. Animation wasn't just for laughs anymore. It could evoke fear, tension, and psychological unease. What censors feared, filmmakers celebrated. Today, it stands as proof that even in the 1950s, animators were itching to prove cartoons could compete with serious cinema. Number 1. The Lost Letter, 1950. Our countdown ends with a Soviet gem that set off alarms everywhere. The Lost Letter adapted a Nikolai Gogol folktale about a Cossack messenger who faces devils and witches on his journey. Sounds like folklore fun, but politics got in the way. Soviet officials worried it leaned too heavily on Ukrainian nationalism. Western critics thought its devils resembled political figures of the time. Even the Vatican criticized its use of mystical symbols. Before long, it was blocked across multiple countries, shelved in the USSR, and labeled a dangerous cartoon. The irony? It wasn't political at all. It was a dazzling piece of folk-inspired animation with bold colors and wild imagination. Yet in the Cold War climate, everything was suspect. Animator Sergei Eisenstein defended it as a masterpiece of national character, but that didn't save it. Hidden for decades, It became a legend among animation scholars, who saw it as the perfect example of art caught in the crossfire of politics. Today, The Lost Letter remains one of the most fascinating, forgotten works of its era, a reminder that sometimes the stories too strange for their time end up being the ones worth remembering most. So there you have it. 20 cartoons from the 1950s that were anything but harmless Saturday morning fun. Some were banned for politics, others for style, and some simply for daring to be different. Which of these forgotten animations would you risk watching if you could dig up a copy? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more hidden film history. After all, if these cartoons were too bold for the 1950s, what might still be hiding from us today?